Today I'm going to be brewing this Cooper's Australian Pale Ale kit. I'm going to try and brew it as closely as possible to the original recipe, so I'm not throwing in anything fancy. I'm following the instructions on the Cooper's DIY website. So in addition to this kit can, it actually suggests using a kilogram of Cooper's Brew Enhancer 2, which I don't have, or 500 grams of light dried malt extract and 250 grams of dextrose, just standard brewing sugar. So the kit and light dried malt extract and sugar I'm going to combine. And the only thing that I'm going to be doing slightly different is I'm using a different yeast. So rather than use the kind of standard generic ale yeast that comes under here, I think it might even be a hybrid type yeast for this one. I'm going to opt for this Nottingham style yeast. So ideally what I was planning on doing with this was trying to get hold of some Cooper's Pale Ale in a bottle, because you can actually harvest the yeast from those and create a yeast starter. So as far as I understand, a lot of the character, the flavour profile of this beer comes from the yeast. So if you can get hold of the Cooper's Pale Ale in bottles, there's instructions on the website, it shows you how to harvest that yeast and make a yeast starter out of the dregs. So don't throw the dregs away, keep those, make a yeast starter and get it in one of these kits. So that is how you're going to get the closest possible replica to the standard kind of commercial beers in the bottle. But I couldn't get hold of the bottles. They were on Amazon, but it was a ridiculous price for 6. So it didn't really seem cost effective to pay 40 quid or whatever it was for 6 bottles of beer just to get some yeast. So from what I understand, and feel free to correct me in the comments below, the original Cooper's yeast was based off of a Nottingham strain. So that's what I've read. So I'm hoping that this Nottingham yeast is going to help to create some of the kind of fruity sort of esters that you fruity and floral characters, it says on the tin, of this beer. So I'm not going to mess about with it, I'm not going to dry hop it or anything like that. I'm going to let this Nottingham yeast do its work. I'm following the recipe from the website, so it's all pretty standard stuff. And hopefully we're going to get a tasty brew at the end. So I'm hoping that this is going to be a nice brew that you can drink out of the fridge on a nice warm sunny day. Yeah, just an easy drinking ale really. So it's going to be a standard brewing process. I'm going to get everything cleaned and sanitised, get some hot water on. Basically you need 2 litres of hot water just to dissolve this, and the light dried malt extract and the sugar. So 500 of the light dried malt extract and 250 grams of the sugar. I'm going to put that into the clean fermenter, add my kit, top it up with cold water, sprinkle the yeast, and there we go. So yeah, let's get cracking. So I'm just getting myself prepared. I have added some tap water into a spare bucket that I have, which I've added a Camden tablet to just to remove the chlorine. So you want to get that out of your tap water because that's going to impart some weird tastes into your brew. So just leave it standing in a bucket with a Camden tablet for about half an hour or so before you add it into your brew, and you can be sure that the chlorine is out of it. So I'll prep that up. I've got my sanitised fermenting bucket over here, which I've just thoroughly cleaned with some hot soapy water and used some no rinse sanitizer on, some of this Chemsan. So I've given it a good shake. I'm letting it sit there all nice and clean and sanitised and ready to go. On the hob I've got 2 litres of hot water, or will be hot water, boiling water by the time it comes to the boil, which I'm going to add into my bucket along with the kit, which is here. And I've weighed out my sugar and my dry malt extract. So 500 grams of light dried malt extract and 250 grams of dextrose brewing sugar. So next thing I'm going to do is take the label off the can and stand that in some boiling water. That's going to soften up the malt extract in here because it's quite thick and gloopy and it doesn't pour very well. So it pours out much easier if you put it in some hot water, stand it in there for 5 minutes. I'm going to open the can and just mix everything together. So the kit's been delabelled. I've taken the lid off. Incidentally, if you're looking for the yeast, that is kept underneath the plastic lid on one of these kits. I'm not actually using that, so I'm just going to throw that aside. The instructions that you get with these are pretty useless on the can. There are some much more detailed instructions on the Cooper's DIY website. So, but essentially it's just chucking it in the fermentation bin and adding hot water to it. So I'll show you that process in a minute. Alright, so I'm just going to add the dry brewing sugar and the light malt extract into the bottom of my bin, fermentation vessel. Found the best way to mix this up is to add the hot water and swill it around immediately. So that's what I'm going to do. Hopefully that's going to mix up nicely. We're in there, so that's all mixed in nicely. Just going to add the kit to it now. As long as you keep everything sanitised, you can't really go wrong with these kits. So after I've sanitised my fermentation vessel, I just tip it out into one of these like sink bowls. Keep my sanitizer in there, and anything that's going to come in contact with my brew, directly or indirectly, I just give it a dunk. So the scissors that I'm going to use to open the yeast, the can opener that I'm going to use to open this can, and when the end that I'm going to open, I'm just going to give it a little dunk. So everything's sanitised. As long as you keep it sanitised, you can't go wrong. In with the kit. It's nice and runny where it's been sitting in the boiling water. Okay, so that's the kit in. You can see, even with sanding it in hot water, it's still left with some sort of residual malt extract left in the tin. So what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of hot water, boiling hot water, and let it stand for a few minutes with the lid on. That usually does the trick. We'll get the rest of that out. Right, make sure you give everything a really good stir. The malt extract has a tendency to stick to the bottom of the fermenter. So make sure you give it all right, good stir, get it all off the bottom, and so it's all dissolved in the hot water. Smells really good actually. That's it, everything's in here, it's all mixed up with the hot water. So I've got my kit, my sugar and my malt extract all mixed in and nicely dissolved. I'm now going to add the rest of the water, the cold water, to my brew. And I do that by just sitting it underneath the bucket. So really at this stage what you want to do is get as much oxygen in this wort as possible. The yeast that you're going to add to this, it needs oxygen for it to get a good start. So what I tend to do is just turn the tap on my bucket and let it drop in from a little pipe. You can see it aerates the wort lovely. Okay, so this is now topped up to 23 litres. Just taking a temperature check on this, so it should be around about 20 degrees. Seems to be just under 19 at the moment, so that's good for me. I'm going to pitch the yeast and put the lid on. There's that Nottingham yeast. I'm going to sprinkle it in and then give it a good stir. So we're back with the Cooper's Pale Ale kit. I did say at the start of this video that I was not going to tamper with it at all, and I was just going to try and bring out the flavour of the beer, the commercial type flavours, just using the yeast. But I got to the point where I was taking some samples and it seemed to me to be crying out for a little bit of hoppage. So I couldn't stop myself from messing about with it. I also had some spare hops lying about, so I did dry hop it. after about 10 days. So I added 25 grams of Motueka and 25 grams of Taiheke, which I think is like the New Zealand version of Cascade. So it has been dry hopped, and I have to say that I've had a couple of these already, and it's really, really nice. So it is definitely benefited from having that dry hop. I like hoppy beers anyway, so it suits my palate. I might get round to doing it as it's intended at some point, but I think to do that I prefer to have the Cooper's yeast from harvested from the bottles. But I have to say the Nottingham yeast that I used has created a lovely clean tasting beer, and it's really let the hops shine through. So I'm going to crack this open, show you what it looks like. This one's straight from the fridge. It's really nicely chilled down. I'm approaching this with some trepidation, so I have opened a couple that have just kind of volcanoed out the top, so something seemed to go slightly wrong with the carbonation, or at least the batch priming. I used 120 grams of Dextrose batch primed, so maybe it wasn't mixed in properly in the bucket, and some got more than others, but yeah, so a couple of them have volcanoed over the top. So this turns out at 3.7%, so it's not a strong beer, it's a summer sipping beer really, but let's give it a go. Hopefully this one doesn't explode. Alright, that's a good sign. I don't need to go rushing out to the kitchen with this one. Let's pour it away. It's very, very light, this. This is kind of lighter in colour than some of the lagers that I've brewed recently. I don't mind that at all. It's a pale ale, but it is very light. That's just an observation. You see it's really clear in the glass. That's actually just condensation on the outside where it's come out of the fridge. It's got a nice head. Again, I used the Young's beer heading liquid in this, so two 5ml teaspoons in the bottling bucket. I don't know what's in that liquid, but it seems to work. It creates a nice head, and it retains that head throughout the glass. So it's a lovely summer drink. You can see that just by looking at it. The wonderful hop aroma. You get the citrus sort of lemon and lime flavour from the Motueka, and it's the first time I've used the Taiheke hops, and I have to say it's really nice. It's sort of added a bit more of a kind of berry aroma to it, sort of berries and stone fruit, but it's lovely. It smells really nice, a real nice hoppy beer, and it tastes lovely. It's not too bitter. Some of the IPAs I find a bit too bitter for my liking. This is just about right. The hops are fantastic in it, I have to say. Maybe if I did it again, I would probably use a kilo of light dried malt extract rather than 500 grams and 250 grams of dextrose. That seemed a bit light when I kind of read the recipe, but at the time I was trying to follow the instructions on the DIY website. So I think if I did it again, it would be with a kilo of dried malt extract. Other than that, I don't think I would change anything else. The Nottingham yeast has worked really well with it. The hops are fantastic. Sorry about that, I think we had some technical problems there and the video cut out, but I was just saying, I think if I did it again, I'd probably use a bit more dried malt extract, or a tin of liquid malt extract. The hops are brilliant, but sometimes you kind of have to just go with the flow and see what takes your fancy, adapt to what your instincts are telling you. I deviated away from the original plan a bit. Probably will get around to doing it at some point. But yeah, so turned out well. definitely give the Australian Pale Ale kit a go. It's a great kit for kind of experimenting with hops and things like that. It's just generally a good kit. So yeah, definitely thumbs up from me. Cheers.